You're staring at the same old problem every time you fire up the fiber cutter. You've got a brand new laser head. You've spent a good chunk on the machine itself. And now you're stuck wondering whether the little nozzle connector you're about to buy is actually going to keep your cuts clean or just add another layer of hassle. You don't want to waste money on a part that looks good on paper but ends up misaligning the beam or wearing out after a few hours. That uncertainty is the exact thing I felt before I dug into the specs and talked to a few shop owners who run version 2.0 F200 heads every day. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about why the connector matters more than most people realize. In a fiber cutting setup, the nozzle is the final point where the laser exits, so any wobble, any tiny gap, any shift in angle translates directly into a rough edge or a missed cut. When you're cutting 1mm stainless steel for a precision part, that half millimeter of extra melt can ruin a whole batch. The V2.0 nozzle connector promises excellent performance and high accuracy, and in practice that boils down to a few concrete things. The connector's machined metal housing mates with the version 2.0 F200 head using a snug, threaded lock that you can feel when you turn it by hand. There's no wobble, no loose feel. That firm engagement means the beam stays centered as you move the head across the material, which is especially valuable in long straight cuts on sheet metal where a drift of even 0.1 millimeters becomes a visual defect. I've seen this connector in action at a small prototyping shop that runs about 20 hours a week on a 1500-watt fiber cutter. Their workflow involves cutting thin aluminum for drone frames and occasional stainless for medical brackets. Before they switched to the V2.0 part, they were swapping out generic connectors that would need retightening every few hours because the vibrations from the spindle would loosen them. The result was a noticeable wiggle at the cut edge and, more importantly, extra downtime because the operator had to stop, check the focus, and retighten the nozzle. After installing this connector, they reported that the focus stayed stable for the whole shift, and they cut through a 2mm aluminum sheet without any edge burrs that required secondary finishing. That's the sort of real-world advantage that stable performance translates into. You keep the beam fixed, you keep the material moving, and you keep the schedule intact. Now, durability is another buzzword that can feel vague until you think about how often you actually replace a connector. In a production environment, the nozzle is exposed to high-temperature plasma and occasional spatter. The V2.0 part is built from a hardened alloy that resists the thermal cycling you get when you jump from a quick 0.5 mm cut to a deep 5 mm groove. In the same shop I mentioned, they've been using the connector for over 6 months, which for a part that typically needs replacement every few weeks in their previous setup is a huge cost saver. The good durability claim isn't just about the metal staying intact, it's about the threads holding their torque over many heat cycles, meaning you don't have to recalibrate your focus every time you change a part. On the flip side, there are a couple of practical trade-offs you should weigh before hitting Add to Cart. First, the price point sits a little higher than the generic off-the-shelf connectors you can find on marketplaces that claim to fit a version 2.0 head. If you're a hobbyist who runs the cutter once a week for small art projects, that extra spend might feel unnecessary, especially since a cheaper part will likely last you through a few occasional uses without a problem. Second, the connector is strictly for the version 2.0 F200 laser head. There's no universal adapter built in. If you have a mixed fleet of heads, or you're thinking about upgrading to a newer model next year, you'll end up with a part that sits on the shelf. In that sense, the Who Should Skip It list includes anyone who isn't locked into the version 2.0 platform or who only needs a connector for occasional, non-critical jobs. So who exactly gets the most bang for their buck? If you run a small to medium-sized fabrication shop that relies on the version 2.0 head for daily production, whether you're cutting automotive brackets, aerospace components, or high-precision medical devices, the connector's stable lock and heat-resistant build will pay for itself in reduced downtime and fewer rejects. It also makes sense for educational labs that teach laser cutting, where students may not always be gentle with the equipment. A durable connector means the machine stays calibrated longer, and the lab can keep its schedule tight. On the other hand, if you're a DIY maker who only uses the